Hello and welcome to another episode of 1000 Actually Fun Books, where we review books of every genre looking for the best of fun escapist books. And today we're doing a book that is in the genre of general fiction or literature. If it was a movie, it would probably be in the drama category, so kind of very general. It's World's Fair Quilt by Jennifer Chiaverini. Chiaverini, I think is what it's, Chiaverini. This, I didn't realize this when I picked this out, but this is one of a series. This is actually the 23rd book in a series that is the Elm Creek Quilts, is the series name. And I will say that it was totally fine picking a book randomly in the middle end of this very long series. It didn't have any trouble getting right into the plot. The author did a fantastic job of filling in who the characters were. You never felt lost, like, oh my goodness, I needed to have read other books to understand this one. No, this one was completely fine with just being dumped in the middle there that way. There really isn't any continuation. You get strong hints of what previous story plots were about. You know, she met a man and ended up falling in love, or she helped somebody overcome this issue, or she herself overcame some issues, or that kind of thing, or they met somebody new. So you get hints of that throughout the book of what other stories are, but you never felt like you needed to have read those to read this one. Okay, so this is a slice of life, would probably be the best way of putting this. So let me talk about what the plot is for this. So it starts out, your main character's name is Sylvia. She has two timelines that we're reading about her life. It is present, and I want to say it's 2004 is the present. It could have been 2024 now I'm thinking about it going, let me look at the first page here and find out what was the actual year. Not that it really makes any difference, but it's 2004. So that's present day. And then you have 1993 as her childhood as she's 13 and her life in that. So the two threads. So, and they're different plots, although they touch on each other. So let's talk about the present day one. This one has a very, very bland plot. We'll put it that way. The plot on this one is that she's 80. She owns a retreat, kind of a, hotel, and people come, and her building is kind of an antique. It's her family home, and it's on the verge of not being able to make enough money, on the verge of bankruptcy kind of thing. And several people that she's with, her friends, are basically urging her to do things to increase the profits of her retreat. So for example, the main thing that starts out at the beginning is they are planning on having you pick apples, because she's got an orchard, an apple orchard. She's like, they're basically saying, encourage people to come and pay for the apples, and that will give you a little extra money. And she is very resistant to this. She's older, she does not like the change. It's very evident that she just wants to continue how she's been doing and for it to be successful. But it isn't working that way. She has to make some changes. So the main plot of present day is her accepting that she needs to actually make some changes to make her retreat successful. And that's really all it is. It's a lot of slice of life. She chats with people. They have things that are going on in their lives. The roof has a leak and they have to fix it. There's no drama really in this. It's just, this is what is happening in her life at the time. So that's one plot thread. The other one has to do with this quilt that's being talked about. So when she was a young kid at age 13 and her older sister was about age 15, the Chicago World's Fair was going to happen, and they put out a contest. And the rules were basically anybody could submit a newish quilt, and this is during the Great Depression. Somebody could submit a quilt and get a prize. The grand prize was $1,200, which was an enormous sum at those days. So she and her sister chose to make a quilt and submit it to the World's Fair, as one of many other people did. And so the thread in the 1930s is her and her sister attempting to make this quilt and submit it, and everything involved both trying to do that and trying to get along with each other, and then what were the results of that, and how that affected their relationship, those kind of things. So again, fairly slice of life, but a little bit more drama, because the sisters have a lot of sisterly tension. They don't always get along. They argue about the colors and the theme and the timing and everything that would go on with making this quilt. And of course they've got other family members and their relationship with the other family members as well. So that's basically the plot of this book. So very laid back, very calm. And I will say that's one of the things I did like about it. It was very much lacking in drama. It felt very real in this respect. So these felt like real people, and it wasn't an overblown, dramatic, drama that you kind of never can relate to. It's like, I never am going to get a blow up, yelling at people kind of situation like a lot of movies and TV shows and books have. Instead, this was a lot more laid back. You have kind of quiet resentment a little bit between siblings, or a parent has to step in and say, okay, how can we compromise about this? I mean, that's a very real level of disagreement and conflict, and that's what this book had. It had a very real flavor to it, very, very realistic. So I liked that about this book. Another thing I liked about it was the historical 1933 World's Fair situation details. So we don't get a lot of historical details about living in that time period, but we do get a lot about the both the World's Fair, but more specifically the quilt show. And it was really fascinating. I actually looked it up, and the details in the book were authentic. So for example, the quilt show for this World's Fair is the largest quilt contest in the world ever, both before and since. 24,000 people submitted quilts to be judged in this contest. I mean, that's how big it was. That's a lot of quilts out there that people made. And it was, it was a huge big deal for a lot of people. There are actually people that have written books about this quilt show, and nonfiction books, and talking about what the quilts were, and there was a little bit of controversy about the quilts that won, and where did all these quilts end up at, and just interesting things like that. If you're a quilt person, that would be really kind of very interesting. So the historical details there were very fascinating. I would say that if the author had cut out all the modern stuff and just stuck with the 1933 stuff, it would have been a complete story in and of itself, probably geared toward middle schoolers. That would be kind of how I would take it. I mean, there's another positive about this. There's absolutely nothing objectionable in this book. This is a book that has no sex or violence or swearing or anything. This is very much appropriate for all ages kind of book. It would be, if it was made into a movie, it would be PG at worst. Characters. So their backstories were well done. I did end up liking Sylvia, our main character, even though she's, 13 in half of the book and 80 in the other half of the book. I thought she was a good character. I mean, a likable woman, but not perfect in either respect. I mean, she was definitely a flawed person, stubborn in a lot of areas, but she was likable, so I liked her as a character. Things I didn't like about the book. So probably the main thing would be it was a little too calm, a little too lacking in drama. This really felt like, it really reminded me of if you go to your grandmother's house and your grandmother has a friend there and her grandmother's friend sits there and tells you a story of her childhood for, an hour. That can be an interesting ramble that you're sitting there listening to, and that's what it feels like. It feels like you're listening to grandma's friend tell about her childhood in a lot of respects. Even though this is more immersive than that, it doesn't feel like somebody's narrating. It feels like an immersive story. But it still has that feel of grandma's telling this, nice, pleasant childhood memory. There isn't any action, there's no conflict, there's no big dramatic anything to really make you want to draw in and stay in the story. It's just so pastorally calm that it really just kind of feels like somebody's diary of everyday life almost. And I'm not sure that that's really all that exciting or interesting to read. I would say it was well written, but I don't know if it's really fun. My second critique, that I only had two, is that it is definitely expecting you to know quilt stuff. So I come from a quilter family. This back behind me is a quilt my mom made. So my mom is a quilt artist. And so I know quilting terms. I know the difference between pieced and applique. I know what applique means. I know what sunbonnet Sue, what that pattern looks like, or what flying geese look like. And they mention these in this book. And if you do not come from a sewing background, a quilting background, you might be like, I have no idea what these terms mean. So if you're curious, applique means something that is not pieced together like two pieces of fabric pieced together. Instead, applique is one piece of fabric that you put something on top of and sew it on. The idea of flying geese is like a bunch of triangles stacked on top of each other. Anyway, these are terms that a quilter would recognize, and the author expects the readers to recognize these kind of things. So if you're not a quilter, you may get, it's not so much that you couldn't read the book, but you might be kind of scratching your head sometimes when they're talking about terms about quilts that you're just like, what? They describe the quilt that they're making, but they describe it in terms that a quilter would get, not necessarily the layperson. Too much jargon for that. So those are my critiques about this book. Not too much against it. I had a really, really hard time, honestly, deciding whether this should be recommended or just okay. For the reasons that I gave, it's well written for what it is. I think somebody who likes this genre of book would like this book. And I would say this was a good choice of the series because I think it was interesting with the historical details and stuff. But I don't know that I would say this is like a great book, a fun escapist book in general. Somebody who doesn't like this specific, very narrow audience would sit there and go, wow, that was really great. And so judging it by itself, I would kind of recommend it. But is it really qualify in my categories for fun? And I kind of am like, maybe, maybe not. So going back and forth, I kind of am leaning towards just saying okay. Like I said, it's a really tough choice. But I'm not sure that I would just highly recommend it to everybody to just say, go out and read this book. I don't really have a strong urge to recommend it to people that I know, so I just can't recommend it here on this channel that strongly. So it's just going to be okay, but if what I described to you sounds really appealing, then this would probably be a book that you would enjoy. Okay, part 2. Part 2 is going to be a fantasy steampunk book. Prudence, The Custard Protocol, book 1, by Gail Carringer. And I don't know anything more about it than that. It's a steampunk fantasy adventure of some variety which sounds fun. So we're going to try that next, and I hope that you will join me for that, and thank you for watching.